Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is where we dig into the sources you share, research, articles, notes, all of it, and pull out the really key bits of knowledge. Think of it as your shortcut to being truly clued in, hopefully with a few surprises along the way.
Absolutely. And enough interesting details to make it stick.
Exactly. So today, we're diving into media representations of ethnicity, social class, and age.
A big one.
It really is. Our mission, basically, is to get a handle on how the media portrays these, well, vital groups in society. What are the patterns? And crucially, what might that mean for how you, listening, actually see the world?
Because these things can be subtle, right? They creep into our understanding.
Precisely. Some of these portrayals are so baked in, you might not even notice how they're shaping things.
Okay.
Okay, let's jump in. So starting with the big picture,
Yeah.
ethnicity. When we look at ethnic minorities, what's the general trend? How does the media tend to represent them?
Well, what studies consistently show is a pattern of stereotyping. It's kind of twofold. Either minority groups are, barely visible, significantly underrepresented, or when they are shown, it's often in these consistently negative ways. And the worrying thing is how this can really chip away at the idea of a tolerant, multicultural society.
That's a really strong point. And that negativity, one area that really stands out in the research is portraying minority ethnic groups as, well, criminals. There was analysis going back a while now, finding news often framed them as criminals or threats or just unimportant. And the really striking thing is how later research, even quite recently, keeps confirming this.
Yeah, it
Like one UK study found, what was it, something like 7 out of 10 stories about young black men were negative. That's staggering.
It is, and it's not just a one-off story here or there. It's this constant drip feed effect.
Right.
And if you connect that to the wider impact, these kinds of portrayals can fuel what some call moral panics,
Okay.
where a group is suddenly seen as a danger. Exactly. Painted as a threat to society's values. And this isn't just academic theory. It can then be used to sort of justify real-world discrimination, maybe even heavier police action. Some researchers found media coverage of things like riots was actually used to excuse quite harsh police responses.
Wow. So the reporting itself shapes the justification for action.
It can, yeah. It influences public perception, which then influences policy and action.
And it's not only about crime, is it? What about how immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers are framed? Do we see similar patterns there?
We do. Often these groups get reduced to just numbers, statistics.
Dehumanizing.
Very much so. They're shown mainly in terms of their impact on resources, jobs, housing, that sort of thing. One report highlighted how the British media, for example, used really negative, quite judgmental language about asylum seekers and refugees.
Which reinforces certain ideas.
Definitely. It feeds into those damaging stereotypes, like the idea there's trying to abuse the welfare system rather than, looking at the reasons why people might be seeking refuge in the first place.
That leads us to think about specific groups. What about Muslims, for instance? There's the term Islamophobia. How does that play out in the media context?
Well, Islamophobia is basically prejudice or discrimination aimed specifically at Muslims. And in media terms, it often looks like portraying Muslims as a kind of enemy within.
Okay.
You see descriptions like backwards or fundamentalists, suggesting they're somehow a threat to Western values. Even things like wearing the hijab, as one researcher pointed out, can get framed as being unpatriotic or a sign of oppression.
So a cultural or religious symbol gets twisted into something negative.
Precisely. It becomes part of a larger, often hostile narrative.
And this extends even to cultural forms, like gangster rap. How does the media handle something like that?
Yeah, that's another interesting example. The media often zooms in almost exclusively on the violent or criminal elements associated with it.
Right, ignoring the context.
Exactly. Researchers have noted that for many involved, rap is deeply tied to identity, to pride, to telling their own stories. But the media narrative often just boils it down to crime and aggression, missing all that nuance.
So we're seeing these consistent, often negative patterns across different groups, which raises a big question. Is this down to individual choices by journalists, or is it something deeper, systemic? The sources mention institutional bias and different viewpoints like pluralist versus Marxist. How do those help us think about this?
That's a really key question. Institutional bias suggests the problem might be baked into the structures of media itself, the routines, the ownership, maybe unconscious assumptions.
Okay.
Then you have these broader theories. The pluralist view is maybe the one we often assume that media just reflects the variety of interests out there in society, like a marketplace of ideas catering to different demands.
A mirror, sort of.
Kind of, yeah. But then the Marxist perspective offers a much more critical take. It argues the media isn't just a mirror, it's more like a tool, that it actively reinforces existing inequalities.
How so?
By subtly promoting the viewpoints and interests of the dominant groups in society, making the current system seem natural or inevitable. Almost like propaganda, but often much more subtle.
Just to be clear, we're presenting these as different viewpoints from the source material, right? Not endorsing one over the other.
Absolutely. It's about understanding the different ways researchers and theorists try to explain why we see the patterns we do in media representation.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've looked at ethnicity. Let's shift gears now to social class. How does media shape our view of that? I suspect there's a big contrast between the rich and the poor.
Oh, definitely. The contrast is pretty stark. Wealth, luxury, success, they tend to get celebrated. Almost universally positive coverage.
Like,
Well, think about how the monarchy is often portrayed patriotic, deserving, almost inherently good for the country. There's this underlying narrative that wealth comes from hard work, and, it benefits everyone. Success is framed as purely individual achievement.
right, the self-made story.
Exactly.
And what about the other end, or even the middle? How does that play out, and what does it mean for how we see wealth and poverty overall?
Well, the middle classes often seem kind of invisible or just presented as normal, sensible, though sometimes certain outlets might portray them as, say, morally superior to other groups.
Okay.
But the poor, or what's sometimes called the underclass, they frequently get a really negative portrayal. Research shows the media often focuses on blaming individuals for their segregation rather than looking at, say, economic structures or lack of opportunity.
Using terms like
Scroungers, yeah. Or implying poverty is some kind of lifestyle choice. And this isn't just, tabloid sensationalism. This constant framing makes it easier for society, maybe for us, to accept inequality.
because if it's their own fault.
Exactly. If it's seen as an individual failing, then there's less pressure to think about broader societal solutions or systemic changes. It subtly justifies the status quo.
We've covered ethnicity, we've covered class. Let's turn to age now. Children, young people, the elderly. Do they get stereotyped too? Do they escape these boxes?
Largely no, unfortunately. Children, for instance, they're often quite underrepresented overall, but when they do show up, it's often in these very specific stereotyped ways.
Like what?
Well, researchers identified about 6 common types. You've got the cute kid, the little devil, the hero, the brave one, kids as accessories to adults, or the modern child, maybe tech-savvy, very limited roles.
And young people.
Young people, especially in the news, get a really tough time. Overwhelmingly negative portrayals, very often linked to crime or antisocial behavior. One study found something like 82% of crime stories focused on youth.
That's huge.
It is. And then in advertising, you get the pester power angle, kids nagging parents to buy stuff. Again, not a very flattering or complex picture.
So kids as accessories, kings as trouble. That's pretty limiting. But the portrayal of the elderly, that often feels particularly loaded, doesn't it? What are the main themes there?
It's definitely complex, but yes, often quite negative. The elderly can be stigmatized, almost demonized sometimes. There's this recurring theme of the burden of growing old.
Right, focusing on costs and dependency.
Exactly. Common stereotypes are being grumpy or maybe mentally frail, forgetful, dependent on others. This constant focus on problems reinforces this idea that getting older is just a drain on society.
But is that the only portrayal?
Well, no, and that's important. Some research actually found contradictory images, too, showing older people as active, healthy, contributing members of society. So it's not monolithic.
But the negative ones are still powerful. It raises the question of ageism, right? Prejudice based on age. How does media fuel that?
It fuels it by making those negative stereotypes so visible and, well, normal. Even if positive images exist, the prevalence of the burden narrative, the grumpy stereotype, it shapes expectations. It can limit how we see older people and maybe even how they see themselves.
So, pulling back a bit, how does this whole mix of portrayals, kids, young people, the elderly, affect how we view different generations?
Well, to sum it up, it seems children get quite mixed, often simplistic portrayals. Young people are largely framed negatively, especially in news. And the elderly, They get a blend, but those negative stereotypes about decline and dependency are really pervasive and quite damaging.
They sting.
They really do. And they can have real consequences for how generations interact and how older people especially are treated and valued in society.
Okay. Let's try and wrap this all together then. We've covered a lot of ground: ethnicity, class, age. What's the big takeaway from this deep dive?
I think the crucial thing really is seeing that the media isn't just a neutral window onto the world. It doesn't just reflect society.
It shapes it.
It actively shapes our perceptions, yeah. Often by leaning on and reinforcing these really ingrained stereotypes about different groups. And this isn't just, an abstract media studies point.
No, it has real impact.
Absolutely. It can seriously affect how you understand complex issues, who you trust, maybe even how you vote, and definitely how you view the people around you, the different groups you encounter every day, often without you even clocking that it's happening.
Which really brings it back to you listening. Knowing all this, how might these patterns we've talked about, these media representations, be subtly influencing your own assumptions about people you meet, work with, see on the street, or even, depending on your own background, how you see yourself?
Yeah, how do those messages become part of the background noise of our thinking?
Something to definitely mull over. Think about that until our next deep dive.